Hello, beautiful soul. My name is Yulia, and I'm the voice of the podcast Love to Heal. This podcast outlines my journey from atheism to Judaism, exploring spirituality from diverse perspectives. It is my hope that my journey will inspire others to embark on their own adventure of self-discovery and spiritual growth. Hello. I'm excited to be back doing this podcast after a little break that I took over the summer. Summer is not over yet, but I did have a good amount of time for myself to rest, to travel, to take a break from social media. Much needed break, I have to say. So now I am back and I'm ready to share my adventures, my experiences with you, and of course, the spiritual growth, which is the most important here. So I will start this season with my adventures to Scandinavia. This episode will be strictly about Denmark, but make sure you listen to the next episodes that will be coming out soon about Sweden and Norway and also some other special places. I don't want to give it away just yet. And make sure also to, if you haven't yet, check out my social media on Instagram and TikTok, because I do have some videos and pictures from these trips, which were really exciting. And I had a lot of special information to share. So my husband and I, we had been planning to visit these Scandinavian countries for some time now. And finally, this summer, July 2025, June through July, we decided to go. We took our kids, and our first stop was Copenhagen, Denmark. I did not know much about this country and much less about Judaism in this country, but I also wasn't surprised when I discovered a synagogue there and also a Chabad center. Because, hey, let's face it, there are Chabad centers all over the world. I mean, literally all over the world, in some of the most remote places ever. So definitely a Chabad center in Copenhagen was not a surprise. And we definitely made sure to visit that Chabad. I will tell you in just a little bit. And in general, I made sure that our itinerary made room for all things Jewish. I wanted this trip to have a Jewish twist, and also for my kids to know that Judaism is important no matter where we are. So we flew during the night from JFK to Copenhagen, and we landed in Copenhagen in the morning. Our hotel was actually an apartment in a very convenient area, very quiet neighborhood, and fairly close to the famous canal street called Nyhavn. Excuse my pronunciation. After settling in, we went to explore the city, where we were met with, drum roll, topless sunbathers along the canals. Now, you have to understand, when the temperatures rise above maybe 70 degrees in these Nordic countries, people go crazy. They jump right into the canals to swim, and they tan right outside of their apartment buildings, on pavement, on steps, wherever they can find space. And also, let's be real here, this is Europe. And they are very liberal with their outlooks on sex and the human body. So as we were taking the canal tour and admiring the architecture of the city, we also obviously couldn't help but, notice what was going on the shores of the canals. And this was a weekend, so people were at home and they had the day off. So there were tons of people just laying around, tanning. Some couples were laying on top of each other. Other topless girls had their string bikinis and showing off the backside as well. There were teenagers playing with a gigantic water toy in the form of a penis, and so on. It was very amusing, but, we did have our kids with us, and I preferred not to point all that out to them because I didn't want them to think that this is the norm. I do want to say that if you're hearing strange noises, this is my dog that we just got last week, and he's following me everywhere. So he may be making some noises, and I apologize for that, but he is new to our family, and I love him very much, and I don't want to tell him to leave. So anyway, the following day, and also in an attempt to demonstrate to our kids that Judaism and tradition is still alive, even in Denmark, we went on a tour of the Great Synagogue of Copenhagen. Now, if you're interested in visiting at some point, make sure you book the tour in advance. You can find all the information on their website, and you can get the tickets on their website as well. I think tickets were about $20 per person, including the kids. And they also, you should know, they typically require photos of passports or IDs in advance, and you should have them just in case at the door as well once you get to the synagogue. So once we arrived at the synagogue, the first thing we noticed was the armed guards in front of the synagogue entrance. They were dressed in military uniform, wearing rifles and other protective weapons. And then to enter the synagogue, we first had to ring a doorbell, which would open the first set of doors. Then, after you enter through these doors and they close completely, then you press another doorbell, you ring that, and then they ring you in. So they open the second set of doors, and now you can enter. And you enter actually into the courtyard, which houses a monument dedicated to the 6 million Jewish victims of Nazi persecution. The monument is a low granite stele, it's called, with 6 granite pillars, 3 of which are sort of falling or are inclined to the side. A Star of David is featured on both the front and the back of the monument. There's also a small playground for kids, which my kids enjoyed while we were waiting for the tour guide. Once our tour guide met us and gathered our group around, she explained to us right away the need for the military protection. It turns out that following the 2015 Copenhagen terror attacks, the Danish military has been deployed to guard the city's synagogue and the Israeli embassy. This security measure was implemented due to increased threats and also anti-Semitism, exacerbated, of course, by the conflict in Gaza, the current conflict. The military presence is meant to support the police and also reassure the Jewish community. The tour guide said that they were recently forced to take down the posters that they had hung up of the Jewish hostages because it was causing too much civil conflict. Some individuals and groups involved in protests or expressing certain viewpoints about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have been reported to tear down these posters. However, if you visit the Chabad of Copenhagen, which we did later that day, you will actually see many flyers of the hostages, and they refuse to take them down. So Chabad, I really respect them for that because they really stand their ground. Then the tour guide gave us some historical information about the synagogue, as well as its present use. For instance, the Jewish community in Denmark is an officially recognized religious community with approximately 1,800 members. There is an estimated number of about 6,000 to 7,000 Jews in Denmark, of which most are living in Copenhagen and the immediate surroundings. But out of those, as you can see, approximately 1,800 of them are members of the religious community. There has been a Jewish presence in Denmark for actually more than 400 years. In 1814, the new royal decree was issued, which gave Jews who were born in Denmark the same rights as other citizens of Denmark. Today, the Jewish community contains Jews with many different opinions and ways to live a Jewish life. Some are religious and others are secular. Social institutions include a home for the aged, for the elderly, and a condominium with 38 self-contained apartments. Also, there's a Jewish day school from nursery through 9th grade. There's also a broad variety of organizations in the Jewish community. Many of them are branches of international Jewish organizations, and they all contribute to a rich cultural life in the community. So that was really nice to hear. The frame for religious life is the Great Synagogue of Copenhagen, as it is referred to, is considered to be one of the most beautiful synagogues in Europe. It was designed by architect G.F. Hetch in a semi-oriental style. And it was constructed from or between 1830 and 1833. So it took 3 years to construct. It seats 900 people. It's very large. And this building replaces all the small synagogues around the old city. It was Abraham Alexander Wolf who became chief rabbi in 1825, and he was the one who took the initiative to start the construction, which actually at that time required royal approval. Apart from the synagogue, there is also a Jewish museum in Copenhagen, but I can't comment on it because we did not make it there. In addition, you could visit the Jewish cemetery in Copenhagen, as well as the Chabad, which we did visit, and the adjoining Kosher restaurant, which I will tell you about in just a moment. So now it was time to enter the synagogue. When we stepped foot inside the building, I understood right away why it's called the Great Synagogue and why it's considered one of the most beautiful in Europe. You know, I am used to seeing a certain style of a synagogue, at least here in the United States. It's typically modern. It's often very similar to the American Christian churches, right? Because the synagogues typically around the world are built in the styles that churches and other religious temples, like mosques, for example, are built in. Well, this synagogue was anything but a modern church-looking building. It was so grand. It was huge. It was royal-looking, as if it were made for kings and queens. The dark wood pews, and I have to call them pews for lack of a better term, these wooden pews contrasted with the black and white tile on the floor, which was lined with a bright red carpet. Both sides of the synagogue are lined with numerous colossal white columns with gold relief that give way to the open concept second floor that provides more ample seating for the women. There were impressive light fixtures that adorned the sanctuary, and the wall of the Torah Ark revealed a great deal of gold detail. So there was so much gold all around the synagogue. When the tour guide opened the heavy burgundy velvet drapes to show us the 5 Torahs in their collection, we were awestruck. We saw gold Hebrew lettering on the wall right above the Torahs, and on the 10 Commandment tablets above the ark, and even high up closer to the striking coffered ceiling. I really didn't expect this. I should mention too that The pews did take me by surprise. I had never in my life in a synagogue seen these types of pews, similar to a church. Typically, at the synagogues that I've been to, they're a lot of times they're either just chairs, or they may be sort of like theater seating. These pews, they were enclosed and they came up, I think, somewhere to about my chest. So they were fairly high. Each row, by the way, had a door with a number on it. So you would open that little door and you would enter into the long wooden enclosure with wooden seating. To make it a little more comfortable, they do put a cushion on that wood. Otherwise, it would be, I can't imagine sitting there for an hour or more. And then there's a sort of enclosed shelf in front of you so that you can put your belongings there. Well, specifically for men that would sit on the first floor, they can put their prayer books there, their tefillin, their talits, and their kippas. So we spent quite some time looking around at the sanctuary and just taking it all in, because again, for me, this was the first time seeing a synagogue in Europe that is so grand, so beautiful, and had so much history. Later that day, we decided to check out the kosher restaurant called Taim, which literally means tasty. I have to mention also that kosher food is somewhat of a problem in Scandinavia, apart from the fact that most dishes mix dairy and meat or mix in bacon. There are virtually no kosher restaurants. There might be a couple. We did see a couple on Google Maps, but somehow it didn't work out for us. Either the hours didn't work out for us or something else. It was too far. So, if you do observe kosher, good luck. When we went out to eat, or just even grabbing a bite to eat throughout the day, we really had a tough time finding food that was clean, quote unquote. Most sandwiches were ham and cheese. Caesar salads contained bacon pieces, and many of the local meat dishes that we really wanted to try came with dairy sauces. So, your best bet, even as our tour guide told us, if you go out to eat, is to eat vegetarian. That's your best bet. So when we did locate this kosher restaurant, Taim, we were really excited, and it was open when we needed it. We realized when we got there that this restaurant was actually inside the Chabad Center of Copenhagen. If you just walk down the street where Google Map tells you to go, you wouldn't even know that there's a restaurant anywhere there. It's kind of hidden. You have to know really where it is. So when we came to the address that was indicated on Google Maps, we saw police guards standing in front of the door, and we automatically figured that this has to be a Jewish establishment because why else would there be guards there? We also, on that wall of that building, we saw the many posters of hostages hanging on the walls. So that was another clue. This probably is a Jewish establishment. So we asked the guards about the restaurant, and they told us to ring the doorbell and go inside and up to the second floor. So that's what we did. The door through which you enter, it actually says on it Chabad House. In Danish, but you can figure it out. It's very similar to English. And there's a mezuzah hanging on the doorpost. So now we were inside the Chabad building, and while the restaurant was open, there was no one there. And the waiter told us that we should order quickly because he was about to go to the evening service at Chabad. At this point, an Orthodox man comes in and starts talking to us, asking us where we're from, our names, etc. And in a moment of our conversation, we established that, well, first of all, he's the Chabad rabbi of this Chabad of Copenhagen, and that he knows our Chabad rabbi, that one of his nieces is married to someone in our rabbi's family. I can't exactly remember who. Their families are so large, and I get confused exactly on who is related to who and how. However, that was so cool that he knew our Chabad rabbi. He even asked us for a selfie with him, and he sent it to someone here in Ohio to show them that we had met. And then he insisted that we go to the service with them. And especially he wanted my husband to come because they just might make minyan with him. In case you're not familiar with the term minyan, a minyan is a gathering of 10 or more adult men or anyone above the bar mitzvah age. Minyan is very important in Judaism because certain prayers can only be said with a minyan when there are 10 or more men in the sanctuary. But also, when 10 or more men are present during prayer, it is believed that the divine presence rests on them and that prayers are undoubtedly heard by God in that case. So, of course, we couldn't say no. So we followed the rabbi into the sanctuary. Now, in comparison to our Chabad, this was a tiny, tiny space. But then again, the community of Copenhagen is much smaller, so it works for them. Plus, a lot of the people in Europe, they prefer a more conservative or reform synagogue over an Orthodox one. So the Chabad in Copenhagen doesn't have that many members, and their small space works for them. The good thing about Chabad is that they do offer weekly classes on the Parshat HaShavua, on Talmud, on philosophy, and they also have discussion groups on Jewish issues. There is, very important to mention, there is a mikvah right next door to the Chabad house. And as for children, there is a cheder to supplement their Jewish education. And they even offer summer and winter overnight camps for children. So there is a small community that does belong to this Chabad house in Copenhagen. Now, inside the sanctuary, on the first floor, there were about, 30 maybe of those pew-looking benches for men, which seems to be, now I realize, seems to be a norm for the synagogues in Europe, unlike here in the United States, right, where we just sit on chairs. But these pews are super convenient. They're almost like a tall desk. Like I mentioned, in the Synagogue of Copenhagen too, they had them. And I could see in Chabad, their sanctuary, same thing. Men would put their books inside those shelves, their talit, their kippas, etc. And they have the folding seats as well. You can unfold it when you need to sit down, and then when you stand up during certain prayers, they fold back up automatically. Upstairs was the women's section. This is, again, another difference from the American Chabad, because here, typically in the States, Chabad is all one floor, and then the room is partitioned with something called a mehitza. And this is some kind of beautiful partition that separates the women from the men. But in Europe, it's customary to have 2 floors. Perhaps because this is what the older structures, older buildings allow. I'm not sure. But this Chabad had that same structure as in the Synagogue of Copenhagen, where women sit upstairs and men sit below. So my daughter and I went upstairs, and my son and husband stayed downstairs. Upstairs, the desks or the pews were much fewer, maybe 10 total, maybe a few more. But the room was also like a library. There were many shelves filled with hundreds of books in Hebrew. Some were huge books. They looked ancient. A couple of them were resting on some of the tables. So I took the liberty to flip through some of them, and honestly, it felt like I was touching history. I mean, these books were so old. Some of them were falling apart. The pages were yellowed by time. And, the cover of the books were this like old leather that you would see in like a movie of some sort. I don't know. It was awesome. So it was really neat to be there and also be part of the service. My daughter wanted to play, so she opened some of these desks and found other kids' toys that maybe come for Shabbat. We were there on a weekday for an evening service, so that's why there were not a lot of people there and no women at all. But I'm sure that it gets busier on Shabbat and holidays. I do have to say it was a bit tricky following the service because, first of all, we typically don't go on weekdays. We typically go on Shabbat, so we're more familiar with the flow of things during Shabbat services. But also, it was a completely new space, a new rabbi that read the prayers a little bit differently or in a different pace, something that we weren't accustomed to, although the prayer books were pretty much the same. And they even gave us sidurs in Russian when they found out that we were from the Soviet Union. So that was really cool. So my husband tried to follow along in Russian with the rabbi. So after the service, we headed back to the restaurant. It was a bit late at this point, and we decided to just order food to go. It was also my son's birthday that day, so we ordered him a piece of cake and went to celebrate in our hotel. The hummus, the pita, and the falafel were super tasty, along with all kinds of pickled vegetables, and the cake was also very, very delicious. So if you are ever in Copenhagen, I very much recommend this restaurant called Taim. Overall, we had a really good experience being Jewish in Denmark. True that there are not many options for kosher food, but Chabad does a good job of posting online a list of products that you can get at the local supermarkets that are kosher certified or approved by the rabbi. And the main thing about Copenhagen was that we felt safe. After Copenhagen, we took a train to Stockholm to continue our Jewish adventure. So make sure to listen to the next episode. If you found the information in this episode interesting or useful, please share and rate. And again, a reminder, if you want to see photos from this trip, you could do so on Instagram or TikTok at Love to Heal Podcast. I will leave you today with a quote by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Enjoy, and until next time. Let the good in me connect with the good in others until the world is transformed through the compelling power of love.